Clarence Thomas has the reputation of being the most conservative justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. But how conservative is he? Let's take a look. This is Beyond the Cover with your host, Gary Benoit. Welcome to the program. And we have with us today Professor Steve Byas, who is chair of his history department at Randall University in Oklahoma. Steve, glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here, Gary.
Well, thank you. Now, Steve, you're also editor of the Oklahoma Constitution newspaper. And, of course, the word Constitution is key because I know you use that as a guide. And you also used as a guide the Constitution when you wrote an article recently for the New American Magazine. In fact, a cover story article that appears in the October 17 issue of the New American. And it's about Clarence Thomas, and the title is Clarence Thomas, the Court's Leading Constitutionalist. So how good is he, Steve? Is he somebody we should admire in terms of his constitutionality?
Well, Clarence Thomas has probably gone further than any other justice. We've had some good justices, Rehnquist and Scalia and Alito. But the thing about Clarence Thomas is that more than any other justice, he cites the Constitution of the United States as the basis for his decisions. That he says the role of a judge is to follow the Constitution and the law, not to substitute his opinion.
So he understands very clearly he's not a lawmaker.
He absolutely does. He's emphatic about that,
right.
As a matter of fact.
Now, I know one of the things you mentioned in your article had to do with marijuana, and you pointed out that he's not somebody in favor of marijuana, but yet he recognizes that the U.S. government has no business regulating marijuana because there's no such power in the Constitution. Yeah,
and I think that probably as much as anything illustrates his viewpoint is that he thinks marijuana is not good, for someone to use, and it has some negative effects on people and all that. But his argument is that it's really not. There's nothing in the Constitution of the United States that would give Congress the authority to regulate marijuana. That is something that would be left up to the states. If they wanted to regulate it or whatever they want to do, that's their business. But it's not a matter of whether marijuana is good or bad, but is this something that the Constitution gives the federal government the authority to regulate?
Right.
And, one thing I've wondered about is, the Congress felt like they had to have an amendment to the Constitution, the 18th Amendment, before they could Congress could regulate alcohol. With marijuana, they just did it. So that shows you how we've come in the last 100 years. Back then, they said, well, we have to have an amendment to the Constitution. So many things that the government now does, they just do it. They don't worry about constitutional authority.
Well, I think back then with Prohibition, there was more respect for the Constitution and more understanding. And today, that is very lacking. And, of course, that's why it's so refreshing to have somebody like Justice Thomas, who really does go by the Constitution. Now, I do want to get into some really important issues, such as Roe versus Wade, for example.
Yes.
But before we do so, Steve, I know you had an opportunity to meet Justice Thomas personally when he came to Oklahoma City one time to speak, and I wonder if you could share, with our viewers what that was like. Of course, you probably weren't with him very long, but what was he like as a person, and how did you enjoy meeting him?
He was. Talking about him personally, I was able, because I knew somebody that was organizing the event. It was the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, which was a conservative think tank here in Oklahoma. And he was going to be speaking, and I knew someone, and I was able to get back and meet with him personally before the event. And what struck me about him is his total lack of arrogance. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say to him, and he didn't think like he was better than me or anything like that. It was just like two people just having a conversation, and he was very genuine.
Now, I know he came from very humble roots and basically pulled himself up by the bootstraps.
Exactly. He came. His father had abandoned the family, and they struggled, and they eventually moved in with his grandparents. And his grandfather was a great influence on his life. That he taught him things, not so much about the Constitution of the United States, but what he taught him was, honesty and integrity, hard work, moral values, and that made a big difference for Thomas.
Right. Now, of course, something that has really propelled Justice Thomas into the news this year has been this decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. And Thomas not only decided to overturn Roe versus Wade, he was one of the 5 justices of the 9 who did so, but he also wrote a concurring opinion. And that concurring opinion served as kind of a lightning rod for a lot of controversy. So could you tell us about that?
Yes. It's funny that, of course, 5 members of the Supreme Court, including Thomas, voted to reverse Roe v. Wade. And Justice Samuel Alito, he wanted to emphasize that their decision only applied to whether or not there was a constitutional right to abortion, not to some of these other controversial things that the court has done previously. And so Justice Thomas, he joined, in the reversal of Roe v. Wade, but then he writes his own concurring opinion that, we should address these other previous things, such as the Obergefell decision, Griswold, Lawrence, and some of these others that had been decided earlier on, that and he would welcome that. That didn't mean that he was going to impose his opinions on the states. All he was saying was these are state issues.
Right.
These are not issues to be decided by the federal government or the federal courts.
Well, one issue he did not mention, but the media certainly did, because they saw it as falling in the same category, had to do with interracial marriage in Virginia, which was against Virginia law until, I'm not sure when, but well into the 20th century, I believe, or is that true?
Yes.
And so they mentioned that, which was, absolutely outrageous, because Justice Thomas, his wife is a white lady, and so obviously they have interracial marriage. But it seemed like the media was trying to say that he was all for interracial marriage because he's saying there are certain things where it's no business of the federal government. But Steve, can you imagine? Can you imagine in the year 2022, the state of Virginia or any other state in the union passing a law today saying it would be illegal to have interracial marriage? It's just ludicrous.
No, it's just a scare tactic,
Right.
that they're throwing up there. And society has changed, and I think that almost comes down to some of the philosophy of the progressives, the left, whatever you want to call them, that they think it is the role of the government to change society.
Right.
And society has changed. We don't need any laws concerning that. Society changed itself, and there's no going back to that. And nobody wants to do that, but they just bring up these issues that really are not pertinent.
I think there's a really good point, Steve, about how society can and does change. And a good example I can think of would be the baseball player Jackie Robinson.
Yes.
Because there was a time when the major league ball players were all white, and Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and this was done without any court order. It was done without any government intervention. And through the tremendous abilities that Jackie Robinson was able to exhibit on the baseball field, it resulted in changing people's minds and changing people's hearts. Exactly. And it just seems that if it were done that way, that there'd be a lot less racial animosity than when the government tries to force you to do certain things.
It is, and I think that would fit in very well with Justice Thomas's view of the role of the law in society.
Mm-hmm. Steve, could you describe any other areas in addition to the overturning of Roe versus Wade where Justice Thomas has displayed his love and his support of the U.S. Constitution?
Well, one thing that I kind of alluded to this is that so many times we hear that, well, this decision that was made in the past is now precedent. And so we're going to follow that. And I know that Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, is like a slave precedent almost. Yeah, we're going to continue to follow this past decision. Well, Justice Thomas says that about precedent is he said that he basically said we don't take an oath to precedent, we take an oath to the Constitution. And if precedent is clearly in conflict with the Constitution of the United States, precedent has to go away. The Constitution is what he took an oath to follow, not precedent. And I would say that's real important. Another thing is the substantive due process which nowhere appears in the Constitution. But basically what that is where judges substitute their opinion on what the law should be rather than what the law is. And so the substantive due process, they say, well, even though this is not the law, this is it's so unfair that this is outside the bounds of society now and all that. And Justice Thomas has said it's not for them to make that decision. That we have society, we have the legislative branch, and Thomas talks about law can be, in his opinion, stupid, but just because a law is stupid doesn't make it unconstitutional, because what they are doing when they strike a law down by saying it's stupid, they are substituting their opinion for that of the legislative branch, and that is not their job. Their job is to apply the law to an actual case, not to make law from the bench.
Right. And one more question, Steve. Obviously, your article focused on Justice Thomas, and obviously you picked him as the subject for your article.
Yes.
Because of his constitutionality. But there are obviously 8 other justices on the Supreme Court. In your opinion, if President Trump did not nominate the justices for the Supreme Court that he did, and if those justices were not confirmed, and I believe there were 3 of them, do you think Roe versus Wade would have been overturned?
Absolutely not. If Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, Roe v. Wade would still be intact, and it would not have been reversed. And it really is frustrating that we can sit around and talk about we don't like Trump's tone or anything like that, but let's grow up, is what I want to tell people, and realize I think the lives of millions of unborn babies are more important than voting against someone because you don't like his tone all the time. That's just irresponsible of people to look at it that way.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. We really appreciate it. And of course, we encourage all of our viewers to go to the New American Magazine and to read your cover story article on Justice Thomas.
Okay, I appreciate you having me on today.
Thanks.